I'm going to ask one more question of our guest, Bob Lazar, non-UFO related. Then we will take our break, get that out of the way, and bring on our other guests, Gene Huff and John Lear. Bob, the last time we had you on, it was not that long after you had an encounter with the government there in New Mexico about something you were selling online. And the reason it became national news is because this particular element was used apparently to kill a Russian spy. And so national news networks start asking questions about the element. I think it's polonium. And lo and behold, they find this guy in New Mexico who's selling it, right?
Yeah, I guess not knowing very much about polonium-210, which was the isotope that was used, they went and Googled it. And I don't know if it's still the case, but I bet it is. If you Google polonium-210, United Nuclear comes up, and probably our sales page with it right on there. We sell a wide variety of radioactive isotopes, polonium-210 being one of them, and not knowing much about it, so they pretty much just came to us and said, what's the deal, and how could you possibly be selling this? And we're really flipping out over the whole concept. But it, as it turns out, the quantities that we sell and are permitted to sell are so small, you'd have to spend $30,000 or $40,000 and take a year of your time trying to mine the little invisible specks of the isotope out of the plastic disc that they're in, and collect them all. And you couldn't even buy that quantity from us, nor could you physically remove the material to poison somebody with. So what they were concerned about was pretty much impossible, and it's legal to sell the material. It just is one of those things that sounds scarier than it is.
But I can see somebody saying, why the heck is this guy selling polonium in any quantity along with all the other potentially dangerous stuff that you sell?
Well, everything's potentially dangerous. I mean, if you go to a grocery store, everything from Drano to Clorox is, potentially fatal if ingested. But science, chemistry, even physics, all have materials associated with it that are, potentially dangerous, from high-voltage generators to toxic chemicals and things of that sort. And United Nuclear has really done as much as it can to bring back science. And if you remember, when we were kids, everybody used to have chemistry sets. They said it in the 1960s in households that had children, almost 60% of them had chemistry sets in them. Now, if you see somebody with beakers and flasks, you can almost be assured that he's going to be cooking meth or something along those lines. So it's really taken a turn. And what we're trying to do is bring it back the other way, is reintroduce science, kind of bring the fun back into it. So we're trying to get our hands on all this neat science equipment that's pretty much been lost and has dropped out of American culture, and we've done a pretty good job of it.
And you had said that it was like the government had declared war on chemistry or something by trying to take all this stuff off the market, especially buying it over the internet or online, that they didn't want people to have these capabilities for themselves.
No, we were actually told that. I can't remember exactly what agency said that, because so many have come and paid a visit to us. But they said, if we could, we'd like to get chemistry and scientific supplies. We're talking about, and any chemicals, beakers, flasks, that sort of thing, out of the hands of the general public, because it's simply too dangerous for them. And statements like that just really tweak me. Everything you take for granted these days, from the DVD players to circuits that run your car to your home computer, all of the guys that developed this were those little science nerds that sat at home and tinkered with things. And
guys like you.
Pretty much so. I fit the mold. But they all have common backgrounds. And you can't, it's stuff like this that stimulates their minds when they're young, and it's just how science grows. And you can't take this stuff away from them. It's only dangerous if you allow it to be that way. Certainly there are some things that are more dangerous than others, but you can't just ban it all, like the state of Texas did. They kept busting meth labs, and again, ignorance seems to lead the way. They kept seeing these beakers and flasks at every place they went to, so they just assumed, well, this glassware seems to be prevalent all the time, we need to ban it. Well, you can cook meth in mayonnaise jars, but chemistry requires special glassware sometimes. So they went ahead and just banned the sale of certain types of glassware. Well, moves like that are ridiculous, and you see that more and more often, and we're just trying to do whatever we can to reverse that. Certainly if there are specific chemicals or things you need to control to stop producing, dangerous narcotics, of course, do that, but really pay attention to what you're doing. Each time you create a new law and ban something, you take away a freedom, and that can have some really far-reaching effects.
Well put. We're going to take our break now. When we come back, we jump into the Area 51 story, 20th anniversary of the UFO's Best Evidence expose, and we'll be joined by John Lear and Gene Huff. Stay with us here on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. All right, we're getting right into the story of Area 51. 20 years ago this week, it sort of all came spilling out in a program we produced called UFO's The Best Evidence. The three amigos are here, the three guys who played a central role in that story coming to light. John Lear, who's been a guest on the program many times, Gene Huff, who's a friend of Bob's and mine and has been here as well, and, of course, Bob Lazar. John, I want to start with you. The question is actually for all three of you, but I want you to start it. We get a lot of, even this many years later, a lot of people who write in and say it's a bunch of malarkey, it's baloney, you guys are disinformation agents, you're making this stuff up, it's a scam. I wonder if you take the time and if it's worth the effort to try and convince people that it is real after all this time.
Well, what I say is that Bob took us out there at 9 o'clock on Wednesday, March 22nd, 1989, and he told us before exactly what time it was going to come up, a day before. So we go out there and we watch this thing come up and fly around and go down. And I saw it through my Celestron 8 telescope, so I saw it. And the question now is, well, maybe he was just a cook. Well, if he was just a cook, then that means that all they do is, all their secret information goes to the cooks out there.
And, Gene, you've sort of been the window to the world for Bob in many respects, answering questions when he doesn't want to answer them. Is it worth it to try and make the argument anymore?
For a long time, I think we've just decided to sit back and let things unfold as they will. And George, thanks to you, you courtesy copied me a lot of the emails that get sent to you. And John, I know Bob's aware of this. I emailed it to him. But John, this former senior engineer Boyd Bushman at Lockheed Martin, I guess, has come out saying that, the government does have alien technology and, what it's being tested for and used for. Again, another grand old gentleman, a wonderful guy to watch in an interview, and as not to divulge any government information that he was privy to under his secrecy agreement when he was interviewed and asked what type of technology he was talking about, he referred them to the Lazar tape. And he said, that's all I'll say. So I think it's interesting that this tape Bob and I and a few others essentially made, on a shoestring 20 years ago is what a senior Lockheed engineer who's now at the end of his run in life and retiring and deciding to divulge information without breaking his secrecy agreement, Bob Lazar's information is what he gives to the reporters. So I think that speaks for itself.
Bob, I know what your answer is to this. I'm just wondering, at what point I'll put it this way. People have accused you of being a shark. and a huckster, and you're in this for the attention or the fame or the money that came with it. And what they don't remember is 20 years ago this week, as I'm editing this stuff and getting ready to put it on the air and reveal to the world who you are, you were in the edit bay trying to grab the tape and had a last-minute feeling that you really didn't want to go through with it, sort of a reluctant huckster.
That's true. First of all, I got to say hi to John Lear because I just haven't talked to him in a long time, and I probably should give you a call once in a while, John. Sorry, I don't.
Yeah, it's 18 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days.
But who's counting?
And I do have to say one thing. I mean, generally, I give John a lot of crap because I think he's crazy at certain times. But once again, and this has happened before, on a particular topic, I think years and years ago, John had mentioned, aside from his claims that there had been extra flights to the moon and people are out there all the time, that there was water on the moon. And I remember, laughing and I'm going, Dan, that's just ridiculous, and shut up. And it's just another Learinism or something along those lines. But here it is, 2009, and they've confirmed that there's water on the moon. So I'll say it publicly, John, you were right.
George, I hate to say how sane John has become in recent months and years, but a few weeks ago when I found out NASA was going to bomb the moon to check for moisture content, I made the call to John Lear and said, okay, now, John, why are they really bombing the moon? I mean, what an opportunity for a conspiracy story. And all John said is my back hurts from my operation a year ago, and I think they're just checking for moisture content. So I was never so let down for searching for a John Lear conspiracy in my life.
I don't think the world is ready for a sane John Lear, so let's just leave it at that.
But I'll go back to the question.
Well, do you get hassled about it, Bob, still? People stop you and ask you about it, and they say, yeah, well, where's your school records, and why didn't you prove this?
Well, I am so tired of – first of all, I don't chase the topic. I don't pay attention to it. For the people that think that this is some kind of hoax or whatever, the only thing I can say is, number one, it's an incredible story, and if you don't believe it, good for you. Because, quite frankly, if the tables were turned, I couldn't believe it either. I mean, you have to take things with a scientific approach and be as skeptic as possible. I can't present enough evidence, again, if the tables were turned, to satisfy my needs to say, yeah, that absolutely happened to this guy. And it's just not physically possible. I can't take people there, as I've said before. I didn't come out with much evidence, and there's, a considerable amount of disinformation that have been splashed around concerning my name and, events, things I've done and whatnot. So it's a hard uphill battle. So, again, all I can point out to is, number one, the events did occur exactly as I say. Number two, if you think I did it for attention, you obviously don't know me, because I do everything I can to stay away from – I'm not out doing UFO talk shows. Well, this, of course, is one, but it maybe once every 3 years I'll do it if I'm bugged enough, only because we're friends. But I'm not on the UFO circuit. I don't, attend these conventions or sell things, so on and so forth. I really just want to be left alone to do my work. So as far as being in the public spotlight, I hate that. If you think it makes money, again, you don't know much about it. There's really no money to be made. If anything, it is real difficult to overcome the stigma of being the UFO guy. We do government contract work and consultation for many companies, and it's a difficult thing to have that hanging over your head. Hey, aren't you that guy that thinks that there are aliens somewhere? Yeah, that's me. And they have second thoughts about us developing a product for them. But so, if anything, I would say it's had an overall negative effect. So there's really no motive to do this. I certainly have better things to do with my time, and I have such limited time as it is. like I said, I don't even want to be involved with the topic, although I feel extremely privileged that I was at that time, and in some respects miss it.
George, before Bob turns the entire universe off of ufology,
yeah.
I'd like to interject that with the advent of Bob Lazar, the world has turned. 20 years ago, I didn't hear the Vatican commenting on life elsewhere, and I think everybody in the country who saw the AP story, it was on the front page of the Review-Journal here in town about the Vatican, calling a gathering of world scientists together to examine the possibility of extraterrestrial life and see how it fits into their perception of God's children. I don't think that was happening 20 years ago. 20 years ago, certainly Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man on the moon, a PhD in astronautics, was not on the record, at least, as saying that he had any knowledge. After doing his own investigation, which included coming here to Las Vegas and speaking directly with Bob Lazar, I was there at that meeting. Now Edgar Mitchell is on the record. I think there's even a video clip of him at the beginning of the movie, The Fourth Kind on abductions that came out this past week. There's a clip of Edgar Mitchell. And here is a brilliant man, a scientist, a NASA astronaut, sixth man on the moon, saying that he has seen sufficient evidence to his satisfaction that there has been life from elsewhere that has visited Earth, and the U.S. government's covering it up. So a lot of this started, as egotistical as it sounds, with UFOs the best evidence and with the Bob Lazar story 20 years ago. So whether clearly Bob hasn't been actively involved in putting this forth and bringing it to the limelight, but the world is turning, and it began with him.
Bob, back to you for a second. I remember there was a point where you reached that you sort of gave up on trying to convince people that it was real. Of course, there were questions about your background, your schooling, your employment record, and we'll cover some of that ground over the next couple of hours. But at some point, you just said, well, what's the point? I'm never going to convince people who don't want to believe it because you can't take them out there and show them the craft or beings or anything like that. There's always going to be another question, right?
Right. But again, I don't pursue that. I don't try and convince anybody of anything. I really just let it be. As far as people asking me questions, I get those constantly, and there's a point I do have to make. I'm not involved with them, but on Facebook and MySpace and these other social networking things, there are, to my surprise, a countless number of Bob Lazar impersonators. And I go on these sites and click on these Bob Lazar links. There's pictures of me, and there are people that are fielding questions as if they're me. It's mind-boggling. But I really do have to say, if anybody is going on these sites and asking questions and getting answers, it's not me. I'm never on those sites, and the only place you could ever contact me would be at unitednuclear.com. And, I have limited time to answer emails, but I do get UFO questions here and there, and, kind of throw them on the side, and over time do answer them, but really be very skeptical of anybody that says that they've contacted me or I've responded to emails on any of these social networking sites, because it's not me. One of them, I think, is the guy's name is UFO Badass or something, and there's even sites that claim that my wife put up this site, and that's why it takes a little time to get answered. I mean, all of this is complete bunk. I am not on any of those things.
Hey, it's like you're Elvis. You have Bob impersonators, like Elvis impersonators. John, we need to take a break. We're going to come back and jump into this with you and how your life has changed because of this story coming out. And speaking with our guests, Gene Huff, John Lear, Bob Lazar. Don't go away. This is Coast to Coast AM. We're talking about an anniversary this week when Bob Lazar first revealed himself to the world in a program that we produced here. He's our guest, along with John Lear and Gene Huff. And there's another name that plays into this in a big way, and that is Edward Teller, known as the father of the hydrogen bomb. He was sort of there at the beginning of this Area 51 story. When we come back, we'll jump right into that. Don't go away. This is Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast. My guests, John Lear, Gene Huff, Bob Lazar. This past week was a really great UFO conference here in town, the Crash Retrieval Conference, and one of the papers that was presented was about Edward Teller, and it had to do with some UFO documents, supposedly about Teller's knowledge of the program. The paper basically debunked the papers as being frauds. But I wanted to know, John, you're sort of the student of ufology, where you think Teller, what role he plays in the overall UFO picture?
Well, I didn't know that he was involved at all until Bob called him that day and asked to re-enter the scientific community, and did he have any suggestions?
Bob, that is where your involvement really starts. You're at Los Alamos, and you see this guy sitting around. Tell that story.
Yeah, at the time I was working at Los Alamos in the Meson Physics Division, and I saw in the lab paper that Edward Teller was giving a talk on, I don't know, some thermonuclear weapon.
SDI, wasn't it?
What was that?
Wasn't it on SDI?
Oh, yeah, I think it was. Gene remembers more of this stuff than I do, and it's my life.
That's my position.
That's why he's here.
So I really had a great opportunity. I wanted to get in there and spoke to my supervisor. He said, yeah, go ahead, and it was down at the little lecture hall. And coincidentally, that day, I had recently moved to Los Alamos, and that day they did a front-page article on Honda Civic that I built that had a jet engine in it. And they had a front-page picture of me in the car, and I went a little early to try and get a good seat. And to my surprise, there was nobody around, and Ed Teller is sitting outside on this little half brick wall, and he's reading the local paper on the front page. And I thought, oh, this is perfect. I can, go over and introduce myself. So I did, and, we talked briefly about the jet car and how it worked and, why I made it, so on and so forth. And I can't remember really what else we got into, but we're just talking about science and topics in general. That, where I really wanted to get to in Los Alamos is high energy propulsion, weapons, something along those lines. And fast forwarding to many years later, when I wanted to get back into science, I left Los Alamos to start my own company and then kind of drifted away, doing various off-the-wall things, and really wanted to get back into it, living out in Nevada now, and with the nuclear test site up there, and at that time it was still running, doing underground testing. I started sending out resumes to, everybody, back to Los Alamos again, seeing if I could get into some of the weapon development or testing, and also to Livermore, to Edward Teller. And in that letter, I referenced our meeting and discussion in Los Alamos. And some time went by, and to my surprise, Ed Teller responded. And it was from that initial meeting is what really set everything in motion. He's the guy that recommended I can't remember if that was the first or second time, but it was certainly his recommendation and direction that got me into that job at S4.
Well, people have a hard time believing that. Oh, heck, you got to be making it up. What does Edward Teller have to do with UFOs? And then after those programs aired here, of course, there was a lot of interest in your story, and some folks from a tabloid TV show tracked down Edward Teller. Gene, pick up the story from there. You remember what that interview entailed?
Well, they asked him if he knew what propulsion systems he was aware of as far as interstellar travel, and he went through the normal ones, fission and fusion, and they began to ask him about gravity propulsion and antimatter, and he said he just cut them off abruptly and said, look, these things are not interesting. Even though they were filming him, he didn't know it. He said, if you ask me about these things on camera, I'll refuse to answer. He was really a curmudgeon in his later years, and they also asked him if he knew Bob Lazar, and they said, well, if we ask you if you know Bob Lazar, could you answer us? And he said, look, so they said, do you know a person named Bob Lazar? And he immediately said, no, I don't believe I've ever heard the name. Now, this was roughly an 85-year-old man. If I asked you if you knew Joe Blow, you'd have to say, well, where would I know him from, or what period of my life? Give me some direction. He immediately said, no, I don't believe I've ever heard the name. And Lazar is actually a pretty common name. But anyway, it was curious that how he instantly said he had never heard the name and that he didn't know Bob Lazar. But then he said if they asked him that on camera, he would sit silent because he didn't believe it was interesting to anyone. So,
well, that's odd.
Yeah, it's odd behavior.
John Lear, is you intimated to me, I think in late '88 or early '89, that you knew a guy that worked out at Area 51, and he knew something about flying saucers, and you sort of teased me with it. That was right after I believe you first met Bob, or maybe had gone out to see the test flight. Have you ever had doubts about his story, though? You know what the questions are. You know what the weaknesses in the story are, and we'll cover some of those. But did you have to wonder at some point, is this guy pulling my chain?
No, never. Never even gave it a thought. Because I was there from the beginning. I mean, I was there from when Gene and Bob came over to my house to Bob was going to measure it to make an appraisal, and the guy that was holding the other tape of the other side of the tape measure was Bob Lazar. And the deal was that Gene would do the appraisal if I would give him a copy of all my UFO stuff. And as we sat talking about it, Bob was just rolling his eyes. He couldn't have expressed his disgust more than he did. I mean, he said, this is ridiculous. I had the highest clearance you can get at Los Alamos. If this were true, I would have known about it. So I was in from the very beginning there. And then in the next 4 months, we told him three things that nobody could have known of that unless they were at Los Alamos. And we told that to Bob. He checked it out. He found they were all three true, and then that's when he made his decision to re-enter the scientific community and try and get a job up at Area 51.
By the way, George, back on Edward Teller, I remember when Teller called Bob, verify if this is true, I think he told you that he was no longer active and he was just working in a chief consultant capacity.
That's
didn't he?
correct.
Yeah, so Teller never claimed to be actively involved in the program in any capacity.
Well, he did say he was no longer involved in consulting. So obviously, if he was no longer involved at one time, he was.
Yeah, right.
That certainly implies he was doing something. But what his actual function was, that
still would have made his word count for something. You know what I mean, as far as referring someone to the program. If
he obviously carried a lot of weight.
Yeah.
And you would expect him to.
Hey, George, could I ask John a question? This Boyd Bushman, the guy, the Lockheed engineer, he also said in this interview that he was aware that Area 51 was moving to Tooele, Utah. Did you ever hear that? Tooele or Tooele?
No.
Oh, anyway, I just thought you would be the guy to ask. But you did say that you thought Area 51 had been moved somewhere, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not Area. We know Area 51 is still there and functioning, but not in its previous capacity, probably.
It's south of there's two of them. There's one south of Wendover, and there's one in the middle of the test site between Sandia it's between Groom Lake and Tonopah, called Sandia.
Well, I know of one thing that's at Tooele. It's a giant plant where they used to burn biological and chemical weapons, and the reason I know that is because I got taken into custody one time when we were working on a story there, and they didn't like the fact that we had cameras, so they hauled us in to see who we were and what we were up to. So it's not without its government facilities and secure facilities.
Where is Tooele?
It's right in the middle of Utah. It's, I think, south south of Salt Lake City. I'm sorry, I'm pretty bad with geography, but it's right in that general area. It's near Dugway, I know, because we were working on a story about Dugway at the same time. Let's go back to the obvious questions, Bob, that have been raised many times. People tend to forget that they were addressed in the very first report that aired about you. A lot of folks cite Stan Friedman and say, look, Stan Friedman proved you're a fraud. He looked for your academic records and he couldn't find them. And I applaud Stan for at least doing the legwork and trying to track down the story, because a lot of other people have just proclaimed it's false without doing any of the work. But people forget that that was revealed in the very first story, that you couldn't verify parts of your background, in particular about the education. And
this is why I came to you. This is apparently, like you said, people they hear fragments of the story and then just fill in the blanks themselves. But I'm the one that came to you with this information, saying, I have seen systematically portions of my background evaporating, everything from birth certificates to, school records and work records, and I'm beginning to get concerned that the next thing that's going to evaporate is going to be me. And I said, I know this sounds like something out of Mission Impossible or a ridiculous television show, but this stuff is in fact happening. And this was one of the reasons why I decided to come forward, because I was genuinely concerned about my life at that time, and certainly John and Gene, the two people that were around at that time, you really can't get a feel of the situation unless you were really there and around and had a taste of what was going on. But this was really a frightening time, and the day that we were out in front of John's house and did the news link, that I was petrified that day. I really didn't know if it was safe to go home at all. And the only reason I went ahead and said anything on the air really was just to protect my life at that time. Certainly I felt it wasn't fair that this was all being kept a secret, but it was much more of a selfish reason. If it wasn't for that, I probably would never have said anything. It certainly hasn't been worth the repercussions. But
George, could we re-examine that Stanton Friedman allegation also? And first of all, I don't want to take anything away from Stanton Friedman. He was out there chasing Freedom of Information Act government documents and taking the high road. I mean, he's a grand old gentleman, and I don't dislike him. However, how that story unfolded is Stanton heard all of these things about Bob Lazar, and Bob said, yes, I worked at Los Alamos. And, of course, you know that he worked for Kirk Meyer, who was a subcontractor at Los Alamos, but he said, I worked at Los Alamos. Well, Stanton Friedman heard Bob Lazar worked for Los Alamos, so he called a friend of his and said, hey, do you have any record of Bob Lazar working for Los Alamos? And the guy looks and no, there's no Bob Lazar working for Los Alamos. So Stanton Friedman puts out a news release, Bob Lazar never worked for Los Alamos. Well, Bob never said he worked for Los Alamos. He said he worked at Los Alamos. And then once we straighten Stanton Friedman out of that, he goes, okay, and now he wants the next thing served to him on a silver platter. So, but the fact that he just made a call and said, did Bob Lazar work for Los Alamos? The guy said no, and then he doesn't take it any further, makes me wonder about some other investigation Stanton Friedman did. If that was investigation, it wasn't very thorough investigation.
Well, he did some other stuff. I mean, he checked with MIT and Caltech, and he got the same results that we got, no records that Bob was there. And, Bob, you and I have had this conversation in person, and, and I've expressed to you that I always thought that was the weakest part of your story, primarily because I could see you being a whiz in science classes at MIT, Caltech, but I couldn't see you ever sitting through the other kinds of classes you'd have to take, English Lit or something like that, to get a degree. I just couldn't.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I just couldn't see it. And then the corollary to that people raise all the time, well, why can't you tell us who your professors are? Where's the classmates? Why don't you show us somebody that you were in school with?
Well, first of all, somebody I was in school with, you met somebody I was in school with. When UFOs, the best evidence came, that guy flew up from, I don't even remember where he lived at that time. But if you recall, you met somebody immediately.
Yeah, we interviewed him at a Desert Blast event. And
no,
Jim
he was never at Desert Blast. I think he came. Well, you met somebody else at Desert Blast, but the one that came up, specifically for that reason from the East Coast, I think he was living out on Long Island, came up and introduced himself, and he didn't know what all the fuss was about, but verified I was there for at least some amount of time.
And George, you sent me the email with the excerpts from the scientist for the Department of Energy up at Rocky Flats in Colorado, who said he remembered seeing and meeting Bob Lazar. He remembered his sense of humor. He remembered when Bob worked at Los Alamos. So people, okay, let's say Bob never even went to elementary school. He's just a bright guy. He never went to school at all. The fact is, you have met and interviewed and gotten information from numerous people throughout the years who saw Bob at Los Alamos. Bob got you into Los Alamos, and you've spoken to people who worked with him there, and then complete strangers contact you going, oh, by the way, I'm a scientist for the DOE, and I remember Bob Lazar. So, I mean, even if Bob never went to school, he worked as a scientist at Los Alamos. So, I don't know how you correlate that. If you think Bob didn't go to school, I don't know how you think he worked as a scientist at Los Alamos.
Well, that's what I've always said, is that for me, the central issue or fact might have been his employment there. And Los Alamos gave me the runaround over a couple of years, saying that they'd never heard of him. There's no record. And, of course, we had the front page headline that identified Bob as working there as a physicist. We had the entry in the phone book. Kirkmeyer confirmed to me that they had hired him to work there. Eventually, we got a paper trail that he was, in fact, there. And it just figures that if he worked there in a scientific, technical capacity, that he had to go to school somewhere. They don't just hire people off the street. But proving it is another matter.
Well, the main question people ask really is about Los Alamos or me actually being at Area 51 or S4. I think the people that are skeptical of the whole thing, or people that are skeptical up to a certain point, they go, okay, well, you did this. Maybe you did work at Los Alamos, but there's no way you were at Area 51. There's no way you were up at the test site. Well, in secure areas, it's really difficult to prove that, aside from having a buddy who you would have worked with, if you worked up at the test site, if you worked in, all of that stuff there is relatively classified. You need at least Q clearance just to be on the site. How could you prove it? What would you do? It's really it's really an impossible situation to provide enough evidence.
Let me say here, a year and a half ago, I had my 65th birthday, and I had about 25, 30 people, and they were people from the test site that I knew there. I flew up at the test site. I flew for Department of Energy, the B-26, the OV-10, and what else did they have around?
Hey, John, I'm going to ask you to hold that thought. That music tells us we need to take a break. We'll pick it up when we come back after the break with Bob Lazar, Gene Huff, and John Lear. Stay with us on Coast to Coast AM. Thanks for being with us, everyone, tonight. We're sort of in the thick of things right now with my guests, Bob Lazar, Gene Huff, and John Lear. We're going to take this break and get it out of the way, and when we come back, I want to get into one of the most mysterious, weirdest parts of this entire scenario, and it's something called Element 115. Don't go away. This is Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back, everyone. John Lear, before the break, you were about to tell us a story about a gathering for your 65th birthday. Happy belated birthday, by the way. Why don't you pick up the story?
George, we must have missed our invitation to that party, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, there were several reasons for that. First of all, there's half the guys here were EG&G. I worked for 3 years up there, 1989 or 88 to 81, flying the OV-10 and the B-26, and one of the jobs I had was before they'd set off an underground nuke blast, I'd fly the perimeter of the test site at different altitudes and give them the winds so that they know which way they were going. Anyway, I met a lot of guys, and a lot of those guys were at the birthday party. So unbeknownst to me, Bob Lazar shows up. I mean, it was unbelievable. I was shocked beyond belief. But Bob comes in, and after everybody has a few drinks, Bob starts telling a few stories. And you could see all these guys, were nodding their heads, and yeah, that's the way it happened. And the reason I tell that is because you said you never met anybody that would admit that. But if you had your camera at my birthday party, it would have been a different story.
Well, I'll have it there for the next one.
Oh, what said that?
I said I'll have it there for the next one. You just have to let me know and make sure it's okay with those guys who show up.
Okay, we'll do that.
Bob, we need to recap a little bit about the science of what you discovered out there, what you were exposed to. Give us a thumbnail sketch of how these things supposedly worked. And I'm saying that because I want to lead up to the discussion of Element 115.
Okay. The way the craft operates is centrally to the vehicle. It has an antimatter reactor. This reactor is very small by reactor standards. It's something on the order of, takes about, I would say about 2 feet square. It looks like half a basketball sitting on a plate. It produces a tremendous amount of electrical energy almost as a byproduct. Its primary function is to produce gravitational waves. And the craft is actually propelled by distorting gravity in front of it and around it. It's a fantastic mode of propulsion and fantastic technology. Being somebody that, is fascinated with exotic propulsion, high-energy systems, things along these lines, this was really something I couldn't even grasp. It was literally something that bordered on being magic. It was really the most shocking thing I'd ever seen in my life, just watching components of this operate. But to make a long story short, I was shown how each component operates in the craft and then how they perform together. Essentially, there's a reactor in the middle of the craft that uses an exotic fuel, a super heavy element. This reactor, as I said, produces a gravitational wave and a huge amount of electrical power. This gravitational wave is transmitted in a conduit very similar to the way, a tuned conduit, very similar to the way microwaves are transmitted. And the wave goes through a waveguide and around the inner hull of the ship. It's kind of difficult to describe exactly how the wave is split and applied around the craft, but it essentially envelops the craft in a gravitational distortion. The actual propulsion is provided by 3 large, I don't know what you would really call them. They're cylindrical objects inside the bottom of the craft. There are amplifiers above them that amplify this gravitational wave, and each of these emitters is hung on a large movable arm, essentially. The craft powers itself up, produces the gravitational distortion, and these emitters focus and move an intense focal point of the gravitational wave and can either lift the craft off the ground or create a distortion alongside the craft and have it move into it, or really do a variety of other things that make it extremely versatile. And there's essentially 2 modes of operation of how the craft can propel itself. I believe they were called Delta and Omicron configuration. Omicron configuration is where the craft is essentially lifted just using a single emitter, a single gravity amplifier, if you will, and the other two emitters are focused out in front of the craft, creating a small distortion in space-time, essentially. And the best way to describe it is, the old bowling ball analogy. If you set a bowling ball in the center of a mattress, and then 2 feet away, take your fist and push it into the mattress, the bowling ball will roll to it. And it's essentially how the craft operates in this configuration. It creates a little distortion in front of it, and the craft moves forward that way. For high-speed travel, or interstellar travel, the craft faces its belly towards the target, and 3 of the amplifiers come online. They're focused at a target in extreme distance, and they run, I can't remember the cycle time on how these things are pulsed.
1/16 of a millisecond.
Are you just
16
making that up, or
milliseconds.
do you really remember that?
16 milliseconds. And it's Omicron, it's Omega, not Omicron.
No, it's Omicron
No, it's Omicron.
and Delta.
Anyway, these 3 amplifiers are focused on a point of extreme distance. There's a tremendous amount of gravitational distortion, and the craft traverses, very great distances in this way. And it does this multiple times to essentially making small jumps, to travel very, very great distances that would be impossible using any other form of propulsion. But all in all, the craft is really an incredibly amazing piece of equipment.
Well, Bob, those small jumps are small in terms of light years, but in terms of miles in a straight line, they're gigantic jumps, aren't they?
Yeah, that's true.
Well, you guys...
when I say small, we're talking in astronomical terms.
Okay, you've told this story over the years, and of course you've had a range of different reactions from scientific types. A lot of folks who will say, this is a bunch of baloney, this is not how science works, we don't know much about gravity, but we're pretty sure it's not this. And
Even
then you've had
that. I mean, I would have to agree. That's exactly what I thought going into it, too, but sorry.
And then over the years, though, you've had other people come forward, scientists who said, that really makes sense. Gene, you've sort of been the guy who's dealt with those types over the years. How would you describe the overall reaction from the scientific community, and do you have support for Bob's explanation of the technology?
Well, I think the ironic thing is that when Bob comes out and he says on camera, to your camera or whomever, this is not even connected to known Earth physics. For all practical purposes, it's magic. This technology does not exist. Then he explains it. They hear it and they go, "That's crazy. This technology does not exist." They say the exact same thing Bob said and then blame him as the reason for it. I mean, he has the same attitude toward it they do. Nevertheless, you can say it doesn't exist all you want, but it's there, and he saw it work and function. And as far as support coming forward, I mean, just like this guy from Lockheed Martin. Ben Rich, who was the head of the Skunk Works for Lockheed back in 1993, when he was giving a speech at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, said that the Air Force just gave us a contract to take E.T. back home. Now, what does that mean? How does a guy who's in charge of the Lockheed Skunk Works, in charge of all the black project research and development at Area 51, make a comment that they got a contract to take an alien back home back in 1993. So I think as those people come out, there is no perfect witness. No one can change the world. Remember when Corso came out and is your audience familiar with who Corso
Sure.
was? Yeah.
Sure.
And all these guys, usually guys get at the end of their life and they decide they're not going to go to their grave with what they know, and I presume this Boyd Bushman is the same way. By the way, John, I just emailed you that link to that Boyd Bushman video. And anyway, they may come out and support it, but I mean, no one's going to change the world. But no one can come out and with the evidence, land a disc on the White House lawn like everybody demands. As these men who, like Dr. Edgar Mitchell, astronaut, like this Boyd Bushman, like Corso, as these ex-military officers and scientists with security clearance who worked on all the black projects, astronauts, as more of these people collectively come out and say, yes, there's ET technology and the government is hiding it, they always come back to Bob Lazar. That's support for Bob Lazar. In fact, I'd love to ask Bob, I mean, it's funny, he goes on the record, he knows what is true, and everyone always expects Bob to be thankful because another complete stranger came forward and said, oh, by the way, you're not a scumbag and a liar like everybody's been saying you were. I mean, I don't know how they expect Bob to react. He never suspected that he wasn't telling the truth, so I think we appreciate the additional support more than he does.
That's true.
On the question of element 115, and we'll get into a description of it in a second, but sort of in the same vein, the reaction from the scientific community, as you guys are being lambasted by all kinds of people and critics coming out of the woodwork, especially about the element 115 part of the story, or including that at least, there were contacts from some pretty high-level folks in Europe asking for information about how to make this stuff or how it operated, right?
Yeah, that was... Boy, that happened quite a while ago, but I don't recall exactly.
Some heavy ion lab in Germany.
Yeah, wasn't that the heavy ion lab in Darmstadt, Germany? Yeah. And weren't those the guys that first synthesized one of the isotopes of it? I mean, am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah, I think so.
I think they did 116 and maybe 118, but of course, 115 didn't exist at the time that you made the statement.
Right.
It does now. It's been made in small particles, but again, it doesn't it doesn't conform to the description that you gave. The stuff that they made, it only lasted a microsecond, something of that sort.
Well, and you should expect that. I mean, if you look at any element, everything has isotopes to it, essentially. You look at hydrogen, the most basic of all elements. There's protium, which is the hydrogen we're all familiar with. There's deuterium, which is still hydrogen, but it's hydrogen with an extra neutron. And there's tritium. Again, it's hydrogen, but it has 2 extra neutrons. They're all hydrogen. They're all element 1, but they're all completely different. And hydrogen's a completely stable element. Tritium is not. It's radioactive. Its half-life is, about 12.5 years. And
it emits photons. That's why it's used for all the night vision watches and scopes and sights and everything.
Well, it emits beta particles, but, that's neither here nor there.
What we see?
But
Well, the point being that the stuff that you saw up there was stable and heavy, and there was like 500 pounds of it. It's much different from...
Yeah, there was a tremendous amount of it, and it was a completely stable element, for what I was told. I detected no radiation emission from it. I detected no neutron emission.
Bob, I remember that, individual pieces of 115 that were kept in those clamshell-type devices. And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't it have to be kept under neutron bombardment at rest for whatever reason?
Yeah, it always had what they called was active shielding. And I think that's, we can get into that later. But right now, I just wanted to cover the isotope question.
Oh, okay.
That, any given element can have stable and unstable isotopes. And like I said, with the most common thing, hydrogen, 115, God knows how many isotopes it has, but there is a stable configuration of it. That is what the craft was powered by. Now, they synthesized I don't really recall what it was, but they synthesized one of the isotopes of 115, and it was radioactive and I believe disintegrated in however many milliseconds or fractions of a millisecond, I really don't recall. But if they just continue their work, and I'm sure they will, it's just a matter of time. They will, as long as they're getting funding to do this, they'll eventually wind up with an isotope of 115 that is completely stable.
Well, you had said in the beginning, Bob, you didn't think they could ever make it like that here. It had to be a naturally occurring element.
I was very shocked that they were able to do it. I believe they used a nucleus fusion technique. I think one of it was a calcium and something else. I really don't recall what it was, but they used a very novel method. Now, they're only making, a couple atoms of it.
Right.
So it's not like they'll be able to detect any properties of it, but they'll certainly be able to detect, a stable element. And it's just a matter of time. If they keep plugging away, they'll, run and discover, a wide variety or as many isotopes as the element has. And like I said, one of them, at least one of them, is going to be stable.
The last time that Gene and John were here, we talked about a cloud chamber experiment that took place at your house, and it was a very primitive sort of a thing. It was videotaped. We had a chunk of that videotape, and I think we included it in a report that we aired at one point. I can't find the original, but what was the point of that experiment? What did it show?
This is back when we actually had a small sample of it. And what we were doing was to show that this unusual element had some never-before-seen properties, that it actually had an intense gravitational wave around it, something you don't see at all, except with large quantities of mass. But we took, inside a cloud chamber, took radioactive particles and fired them past the piece of 115 and watched them deviate off their normal course. We were planning on doing a lot more with the element, but we ran into some trouble. There's a whole story there about it being removed from our possession.
Well, of course, there are stories about how you got it in the first place, the assumption being you must have stolen it from up at S4, right?
Right.
And that's not true.
Well, I don't even want to get into how we came up
Bob,
with
don't
it.
you think it's a little misleading when they see some of these reports saying that they've made some element 115, and you explained to me how they detected these things, and sometimes these particles are flying by filters and they detect them. I mean, they are hell and gone from having a quantity that they could hold in their hand.
Oh, never
I mean, I don't think people even understand how little there is and how quickly it decays when they hear a report like that. So you might want to expand on that a little bit.
I mean, they're really just slamming atoms together and watching this collision. This is all happening in tiny fractions of a second, smashing nuclei of atoms together and watching particles ricochet or get launched out of this collision, and high-speed detectors just picking up the particles as they fly by. That's all they're ever going to do. That's all they'll ever be able to do.
Well, we need to take a break here. The question I probably shouldn't ask is what happened to that sample of 115? You guys think about how you want to answer that. When we come back, we'll get into it. Stay with us, everyone, on Coast to Coast AM. Talking with Bob Lazar, Gene Huff, John Lear about Area 51, Element 115. There was a piece of it that they had for a while. Curious about where that went. Also curious, and what we'll get into when we come back, is the physics, the technology. What happened to it? If it was 20 years ago and they were working on it then, where is it now? Stay with us on Coast to Coast. We're talking with Bob Lazar, Gene Huff, and John Lear about Area 51. Before the break, we got into the issue of Element 115. You guys had a chunk of it for a while. Gene, I'll rely on you to give the diplomatic answer. If you had it, where is it?
I think it was stolen, and I'd like to start the rumor that John Lear has it right now. I know there's a guy that's doing a lot of Bob Lazar research named Ken Yakel down in Southern California who's just shaking his head right now because he likes answers on this same subject. But I think it was stolen is probably about the most honest answer.
It all depends what you want to say, but the bottom line is there's still a piece of it missing, and I think that's about all that I'm going to say.
But you can imagine people saying, well, if you had that, there's the proof. You bring it out, you show it to the world, there's the proof that you're telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And did that ever occur to you to do that?
But if he brought it out, would that mean that it was the fuel for flying saucers that were brought here by aliens that make a disc capable of interstellar travel, or would it just be a unique piece of really heavy metal?
Well,
we thought about all this stuff 20 years ago.
Well,
that was part of it was, certainly we had to do, we wanted to do some of the testing ourselves and, release knowledge that we had a piece of it. And, where do you send it? How can you hear about all kinds of things like this just disappearing? And, what would you do with a piece of element 115?
Who would you get arrested for espionage if you're caught with it?
Yeah. So we didn't really get a chance to do much with it because it was shortly after we had it that it was removed from our possession.
The technology you described, they were working on it 20 years ago. They made some progress, not enough for you, which is one of the reasons you said you came forward with this information. But do you imagine that they have perfected it now to the point where they can use it in a practical way?
No, I don't think so. It is never going to move forward fast enough, and it was, very aggravating back then. When something is run strictly by the military or whatever faction of the government controls it, you don't have that scientific, that open, free discussion, that exchange of ideas. If they would have employed that from the beginning, we would have really made leaps and bounds. But if you keep everything in just a small, tight-knit group of, under 24 people, the progress you're going to make is so slow. It's so frustrating. The system we had there that I told you about, the buddy system, where it's just you work in groups of 2. You can only communicate with the person, your buddy, the person you're set up with, and there's really minimal crosstalk between the different topics and different groups, and it's so stifling. Even today, it pisses me off to think about it. Just the technology, the wonders you have at your fingertips there. You just can't keep this quiet the way it is. You must release this out to the scientific community. And I know it has all kinds of weapon potential. I know it has. I'm sure there's 100 different reasons why they're not releasing it, none of which I think are that valid. But, certainly expand the amount of people that you're exposing this information to if you want to get anywhere with it, because it's really unlimited power, and maybe that's the main reason.
George, here's a quote from Ben Rich. Again, he was the former head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, the SR-71, the stealth bomber, the stealth fighter. This was the head man of all the black projects that everyone, always accuses the government of hiding out at Area 51. Back in the early 90s, he said this. This is a quote. "We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." That's a direct quote of Ben Rich.
Well, I'd have to agree with that.
Well, you look back on that period and what they could have done with that technology, and the description you gave, Bob, of the small teams and the lack of expertise. That leads to one of the criticisms of your story, is that they say, yeah, you're a smart guy and you may know this and that about electronics and physics, but you're not a PhD. You're not the cream of the crop
right.
Back then. And I mean no disrespect.
I agree with it 100%.
So why would they bring you into it? Why would they bring you into that program?
This is my question. You can't answer my questions with the same question. That's the first thing I mentioned to you, if you recall. It makes no sense. Why are they picking me for this job? Certainly, this isn't my specialty. There must be some other qualities they're looking at. Who knows what they are? But no, of course, there are people with 1,000 times more knowledgeable on this. And maybe it's just not outright knowledge they're looking for. Maybe they were looking for someone and come out of left field with some new, fresh ideas because they weren't making any progress anywhere. But yeah, this is the exact thing that I put out there.
But George, Bob is a comprehensive problem solver, and he's exhibited that in his previous jobs. He was a widower at the time he was hired. A lot of reasons to use a guy like that. I mean, can you take the head of the physics department at MIT who has a wife and kids and a job and goes to work every day and suddenly remove him and fly him out to Nevada and fly him out to the Area 51 and back to Las Vegas every day and keep that quiet? I mean, if you took all the top minds from all the universities, would they stay quiet? I mean, they'd be noticed as being missing. They'd be noticed as being removed from their normal life. I think they have to take guys like Bob. They're the only ones who aren't missed in their day-to-day life.
Well, it feeds into the scenario that's been discussed many times over the years that this is all disinformation. It's occurred to me that, Bob, they may have chosen you because you're a savvy guy and a smart guy and you might have contributed something to the program, but also because they might have figured you might have talked about it, or they figure if you did talk about it that you would be easily dismissed or, character assassination, whatever, which is a lot of what happened.
Well, yeah, that's true. Like I've always said, I'm an easy guy to, or certainly a candidate for character assassination.
But it's possible that was true of everybody else at S4 too. We don't know. I mean, clearly the lead guys from Caltech, the lead guys from MIT, the lead guys from everywhere are not working at S4. So how do we know what the credentials or what the situation was of the other people that worked there?
Maybe that is part of the idea there. It's just to keep a lower profile, but if in fact that's it, that has some terrible effects on the program.
Well, they run the story. They release it to a gullible reporter like me. I bite on it, and they sort of run it up the flagpole and then discredit you, and they're just sort of gauging public reaction to what would happen if they release this, which is why a lot of people say, it's all disinformation. They're trying to deflect attention from something else out there. John, this is sort of your area of expertise. What do you think about that scenario?
Well, let's see, the bell jar experiment. That'll settle everything.
Meaning the videotape.
The videotape.
But I mean, the idea of disinformation. You've been characterized as sort of the Svengali of this whole thing. You must have set it up, talked Bob and Gene into going along with the story. Well, explain the laughter.
We're such easy guys to talk into things, aren't we, John?
Well, I mean, explain that for the sake of the listeners, though, why that's funny.
Well, I mean, John and Bob have been arguing at odds about a million different points over the years. John didn't even know Bob until I took him over there and introduced him one day. I mean, John was already on your local interview show here on the record telling us all about Richard Nixon and Jackie Gleason and all of the stuff, before Bob Lazar was around. Now, John was out there on a limb. I mean, John used Bob to back him up. It wasn't the other way around.
Are people implying that I guess I missed the point here, that like John and I fabricated this story for, is that?
Yeah, that's come up once or twice over the years.
Oh, is that what you're talking about now?
Yeah, but the larger disinfo scenario is that maybe you were duped, that you were shown this stuff, that they created this whole thing, that they wanted you to spill the beans, and it's sort of a psychological operation, or maybe to divert attention. I mean, you've heard that scenario discussed.
Well, wait, divert attention from what?
Yeah.
So,
that's my question.
I was given this material and free reign to analyze it, tinker with it, and so exactly what, and I certainly convinced myself I knew what I was dealing with. So what could be more shocking than that?
Yeah, what dastardly thing are they hiding that they decided to put a giant UFO story out there for? And how? And again, they gave him this ammo. They implanted this story in his head with mind control. And then what did they throw up in the air on the Wednesday night when he took us out there to see the
yeah,
test?
scenario becomes completely ridiculous when you look at how the events took place.
When they took him down to the St. Louis substation and registered his guns when he was in the program, when the Russians were in town running around trying to bribe people. What about there are other comical stories that never really hit the mainstream. And Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't you supposed to actually give a little seminar to some other guys out at E&G or something, and you overslept and didn't go give the class?
Oh yeah, boy, that was a disaster. But yeah, there's, in a radio show, it's impossible to cover all of the little fine points of what happened, why, claims of along those lines are beyond ridiculous.
How about
I asked him at the time when I was first shown some of the ET material, and seeing the breadth, the size of the base, and the amount of equipment they had, and how do you guys keep this secret? And that's the first thing they told me, which I've mentioned before. I said, it's the easiest thing in the world to keep secret. It's nothing like any of our other black projects, because nobody believes this stuff is true. It's a piece of cake, and it is true. People have a built-in prejudice, essentially, that, flying saucers, aliens, this is all the stuff of science fiction. And, for the most part, that's just the way people believe. It's very difficult. That's how I was in the program. I mean, to me, this was all silliness. Everything I heard from John Lear and, these reports on TV of people being abducted, and this was total silliness to me, although I still have a problem with a lot of it. I'm probably the biggest UFO skeptic there is, but when it comes down to, are there actual ET craft here on Earth, it really is true.
Well, the explanation I give about the disinformation scenario is if they were, in fact, trying to divert attention from something else going out there, some legitimate national security program, and they just wanted to mess with people's minds, it had to backfire on them, because the result of your story, the UFO story at S4, I mean, tens of thousands of people trekked out there. Every news organization in the world has been there. Congressional investigators have been there. They got a lot more scrutiny than I think they ever wanted, no matter what it is that they're working on out there.
Well, they had bus tours out there, didn't they?
Yeah, for a while.
But it's like I said, those scenarios don't make any sense at all. So it couldn't. I mean, that's not even a reasonable guess.
But George, look at the people that have come forward to you that you've never even gone public with, people that have told you things that they don't want released until after their death. What about this Boyd Bushman? What about Edgar Mitchell? What about, there are other people who have, well, Edgar Mitchell at least had a conversation in person with Bob Lazar, but this Boyd Bushman, he has no idea. He's never spoken to Bob Lazar. There are people coming out confirming this stuff. Now, if this was all a mind control game and a disinformation act played on Bob Lazar, why are the former senior engineers from the Lockheed Skunk Works and astronauts and all these people coming forward saying they've seen evidence of their satisfaction that this is real, if all this was just a hoax on Bob Lazar? What are all these guys big dummies that just believe Bob Lazar? They've seen corroborating evidence elsewhere from other than Bob Lazar.
One other topic I want to touch on before we go to the break and then open up the phone lines is polygraph tests. This has come up again. There's a character online who writes about it based on things he channeled information or something. He knows the truth about it, and he writes about all the polygraph tests, and you flunked all of them. You want to walk through this scenario? I know that it took a while to convince you to go ahead and get these tests.
Wait, somebody said I flunked them?
Yeah. There's a guy came out.
That's not true.
Yeah, I know it's not true, and I've told the guys in this particular chat group it's not true, and went through the scenario, and it doesn't matter. People who were not there at the test, didn't see the results, didn't talk to the polygraph examiners, are sure that you flunked them.
Well, of course, people can make up what they want, but we're trying to deal with reality here. I don't remember the guy's name. The only time there was inconclusive results was the initial polygraph. The guy who said, "You're going to be my ticket to to the Geraldo show or something like that. And I think he was more concerned about becoming a star from this than doing a polygraph test. And you
even passed one
arranged
of those.
for and paid for these polygraph tests, and you got what was that guy's name? That ex-cop.
Terry
Yeah,
Tavernetti.
the first guy his name was Ron Slay. And,
That's right, Ron
it was a pretty
Slay.
perfunctory test, but actually he had said that the results were inconclusive. He ran it twice.
Right.
He thought you might have been deceptive in the first one, but he said afterward in an interview that you were really scared, and that seemed to affect the test results. The second guy, and he recommended we do a second one, his name was Terry Tavernetti, a former police officer who is now still a corporate security officer with a major gaming corporation. He performs polygraphs as part of his job every day, and he said in unequivocal terms that you passed. And he broke the test up into 4 areas. He put you through it twice, and you passed.
Right.
No question about it.
But then it was some of Terry Tavernetti's, I think, associates. Someone else took a look at it, and their opinion was that they saw a couple of areas that they thought where they might have been inconclusive. But inconclusive was the worst that ever happened. He never failed a polygraph at all.
Yeah, that's true. So,
Well,
I mean, how could somebody come out of left field, not being there, not knowing these guys, and saying and come up with statements like that? This is the craziness that I get exposed to all the time. People hear portions of the story and weave together the remainder, and it turns into the most ridiculous story, something that I'm not even familiar with. But yeah, it's guys like this, these UFO nuts. It's why I try and distance myself from this topic completely.
George, should polygraphs be subjective? I mean, can 2 people read a polygraph differently?
Well, I guess slight nuances, but Terry Tavernetti said you passed. He gave it to a second polygrapher who agreed with that estimation. He gave it to a third who agreed but said, well, maybe you're telling stuff that you heard from somebody else and he'd like to see another test, but nobody said that you flunked. Of all the people that looked at it, nobody said you flunked. I
thought the first guy, actually, the Ron Slay, I thought Bob had passed one and one was inconclusive. I didn't realize.
Right, that's what George said, yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I thought it was, it doesn't matter at this point.
Yeah.
The overall result was inconclusive. Well, we got a couple of minutes left before the break, and we open up the phone lines. Bob, I guess safe to say that you would not do the same. You would not play it the same way.
No, boy, a lot of times gone by, and like I said, I really feel privileged and to have been part of the project, and obviously it fascinates me. Somebody this deep into science, where it's part of my life to be on beyond the cutting edge, is really something. And but the way this all went down, and the way it was digested by the people in general, I don't think I would ever say anything again. And
because the effects on your personal life.
Yeah, because of the effects on my personal life, and just it was really eye-opening the way people receive information like this, and how hostile they'll be because they just don't want to believe something, and the tremendous amount of disinformation and attacks associated with it. Why in the world would I ever do that again?
All right, we have another hour left with Bob Lazar, Gene Huff, John Lear. Stay with us. We'll be opening up the phone lines here on Coast to Coast AM. Celebrating marking the 20th anniversary of the Bob Lazar story, Area 51, S4, flying saucers in government hangars. Also joined by John Lear and Gene Huff. I know a lot of you have questions for this trio, and we'll get right to the phones as soon as we come back on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. We're in the final hour with Bob Lazar, Gene Huff, John Lear. We're opening the phones in just a moment, Bob. You had said earlier there are a lot of Lazar imposters out there on websites and Facebook and things of that sort. A couple of the listeners had written in saying they were curious about a site they found that had artwork and drawings and things of that sort, whether that you were related to that in any way.
No.
Could that be John Ferret's old site?
Well, that's boblazar.com. Now that, yeah, I'm not talking about that site. That's John Ferrat, a friend of mine, and he essentially put all the, I don't know what the status is, but he put essentially the bulk of my story online and drew all the graphics concerning the reactor, technical aspects, measurements, that sort of thing, everything that I knew at the time. Now, that's a separate website that I wasn't involved in, but certainly knew about. These other ones I'm talking about, the social network groups, the MySpace, Facebook, that type of thing, none of those have anything to do with me.
Okay, going to the phones. East of the Rockies.
George.
Fred. Yeah. Hello? East of the Rockies, Fred in Florida. Are you there?
Fred.
Okay. How about
George.
west of the Rockies? What were you going to say?
I was going to say that it's important to clarify that what they just heard is that Bob Lazar isn't even involved with boblazar.com, much less the other website. So that was pretty interesting
Right.
statement, actually. Okay, go ahead.
West of the Rockies, 007.5 in Southern Cal. Are you there?
Well, hello, everybody.
How you doing?
I'm doing better than ever. This is my birthday, 55 today.
Happy birthday.
Well, thanks. I wanted to tell a true story. In 2001, I was up in the mountain above Palm Springs. They call it Idlewild up there. And one night I was setting out, couldn't sleep. I was setting out on a chair in front of my house up there. And a lot of cloud and fog moved in fast and mysteriously that night. And something made me look up. At the exact second, this big old, perfectly round flying saucer came in, and with the lights turned off. I could see it plainly because it came in low enough. And they turned the lights on when they went over my head, and it pulsated white light. Looked like a wheel going around it, inside of it, around the edge of it, probably the propulsion system. I don't know if that would have been magnetic rail thing or whatever it was. It's got to be a lot more advanced than what they got in Area 51. I don't know how much back engineering they've done over there, but anyway, after they went over my head, they turned the lights off, and I heard it land. And a little bit later, all the lights in Idlewild blinked on and off a couple of times. And a little bit later, this strange lady, says her name was Tomorrow, comes down the road, gets a cigarette from me, and as she's leaving, turns and says, "I'll see you tomorrow." Now, from what I've learned from the people from the ship since then, I think they're in the process of doing a roundup to take a load up to their planet. But who's to say this whole planet isn't nothing more than space aliens living on this planet that they originally seeded? Who's to say that isn't true? What it might be. So the question is, could that possibly be true? And basically, message is, if you can do good consistently instead of doing bad, then you're a candidate for rescue. I'd like to know everybody's thoughts on all this, and thanks a lot. I'll hang up now.
John?
Okay. John, you want to tackle that one?
Is John awake?
Am I still awake?
Sorry, John. It's pretty late for you. Did you hear that question?
Yeah, just give me the base of what it was.
Well, I think he saw a UFO incident and had an encounter with somebody who was a strange lady, and his suggestion was maybe we're seeded here, that aliens seeded the planet.
Yes, that's possible. And the way you get out of here is to exercise integrity without envy and without greed.
So
Okay.
secret to success.
Maybe I'll bring it back to you, Bob. And all the material that you read leading up to your introduction to the program, did you see anything about intent of the visitors or what they want?
I mean, it's my intent as the visitors or what they want. I don't think it was ever made clear what their intent was. Is there information that I saw that might imply that they had something to do with putting people here. Well, possibly. I mean, that's my personal belief. I think, to some extent, people were seeded in, if you want to call it that, by another civilization. But, it's...
Meaning genetically altered, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you read something about genetic alterations that took place throughout human history, right?
Right. So, I don't know, is that seeding? I guess in some respect it is. But,
they were doing us the favor, more or less. Wasn't that your perspective? I mean, there was more in it for us than for them, apparently.
That's certainly true.
Wildcard line, Ed in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Good morning, Ed.
Morning, George. Fantastic show, as per usual. And happy anniversary, 28 years. I am very much a fan of Bob Lazar and John and Gene's work, and I wish that you guys would make the first show available on Coast to Coast, like the interview show that you did on TV, as well as Art's first show. I think it was in 1990, I believe, that Bob Lazar was interviewed on Coast to Coast.
Well, that was a long time ago. I can't believe it's been 20 years myself.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I have a couple questions, and a brief comment. And, oh, my God, where to start? It's quite a privilege and a pleasure to speak to you, Bob.
Well, thank you.
Good luck with your new endeavor with the car inserts or whatever, the hydrogen
kits. Well, yeah, thanks again for that.
My mom worked for Air Products for 30 years, and my dad at each picnic would talk to the president of Air Products and say that he had plans for a hydrogen car when he was fighting in World War II in Brazil.
Really?
With the American soldiers, yeah. And he would tell the president of Air Products every summer at the company picnic, why don't you build a hydrogen car? You wouldn't have to import any more oil. And, and they said, yeah. And then, like, last year they announced that Air Products is now trying to make their version of a hydrogen car.
Oh, no kidding. Now, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, Air Products, one of the biggest suppliers of gases, industrial gases in the world, and for NASA. Anyway, the other question is, when are you going to make your autobiography? And if so, you could possibly fund even more hydrogen car work. And the other question is, if you were offered to work again for Los Alamos or somewhere in Area 51, like if they called you up and said, okay, we're sorry, we want you back, would you go? And I have another comment, if I could, please, after that question. Well, the comment is a joke. It was 20 years ago that Joan Rivers said in one of her concerts, in her comedy concert, she said, you know why a UFO never lands in a Jewish lawn? Poking fun at herself and my own religion. She said, because they would turn it over to see who manufactured it, see if they can get in on it.
Thanks, Ed.
Like kind of the truth, because they always want to build stuff. And my family, indeed, was involved in manufacturing for years, and it's like a triple entendre joke. But anyway, that's my questions, and good luck. God be with you and all of you, and more power to us all. And hopefully the future will be one of peace and no oil and lots of hydrogen cars everywhere, not polluting the earth.
I'm all for that.
Thanks, Ed. So, Bob, the central question there is pretty interesting. Would you work for them again? They said, hey, all is forgiven. Come back to S4. We need your help on these saucers.
You won't believe how often I think about this. And that's really a tough question because, first of all, I'd apologize to them because they were right. Just keep your mouth closed, and that's the only way to stay here is to go with the flow. And, I am so sorry I made that move. But getting back to the question, unfortunately, my life has gotten a lot more complicated. I mean, I have several businesses and all that and moved, and wife in Michigan. However, if we can put all that stuff on hold, or if I was just single again without attachments to other businesses and all that, would I go back? Yeah, in a heartbeat. I really would.
Bob, I need to ask a question. You spoke before about one of the problems with hydrogen cars is detecting the leakage because there's no odorants involved with the hydrogen. And, of course, as you know, they pretty much proved that the reason the Hindenburg lit up like it did was because of the aluminum doping on the skin,
right,
and not the hydrogen itself. How explosive is hydrogen? You said, well, if a cubic foot of hydrogen leaked out, I mean, does it catch on fire that easily? How dangerous is it? How explosive is hydrogen?
Well, a cubic foot isn't really that dangerous. It burned in air, and it does have a wide range of flammability, but
it's got to be contained, right?
The real problem here is overcoming the stigma of hydrogen. When you mention hydrogen to people, they're only going to think of two things: the Hindenburg or a hydrogen, thermonuclear bomb. And both of them are bad news. So it's tough overcoming that. The actual dangers are very minimal, and a gasoline car by far is the bomb that you're driving, not a hydrogen car.
I want to go back to sort of the implication of Ed's question there and your interesting answer that you would actually think about going back and wish you had stayed in the program. Could you imagine, or have you thought it out about where it would be now, what your role would be if you'd stayed in it, how far the research would have progressed?
Well, if things would have gone a lot smoother, and we wouldn't have had the security problems that popped up, and if things remained under control, is it possible that we would have made more progress? I don't know. Who knows how many people before me tried to make the identical progress that I was trying to do. I focused on what I was primarily interested in and, what our group was directed to do. But I certainly don't see why I would have made a giant difference. Basically what I'm saying, in this amount of time, we'd probably be about the same place they are now. I don't think I had any special abilities or any I can't think of the word to say, but
well, you know what? We're just guessing. I mean, maybe they made a breakthrough. Maybe that statement out of the guy from Lockheed is more telling than we know, that they have figured it out by now.
It's possible, but I have no reason to think that I could have been a major contributor, any more than any other person there. So that's hard to say.
But then Ben Rich says, who used to run the Lockheed Skunk Works, says that it's locked up in Black Project, and it would take an act of God for it to ever be used for any public purpose. So what they're saying, that indicates to me they're probably talking about they're going to keep it for weapons and military, defense or offense purposes, whatever, but it's never going to, be disclosed and given to the public for any benefit.
It's a crime, but if they're not going to let the people know about it, I sure want to know.
Yeah.
I just have a craving to get back into where I was, and I know that's impossible, but I do think about it all the time. It's kind of like, that annoying feeling you have.
What if?
Yeah, exactly. It's a what if that never goes away, and I really don't know how to describe it, but it bothers me a lot because there are times I said, well, no, I'd never go back. This is ridiculous. But really, as time goes on, and now I'm over 50, you start thinking different. And boy, if things were as they were back then, I would jump right back into it. Nowadays, with like I said, the way my life is, it'd be impossible.
Do you think if you had stayed quiet and not gone public, they yanked your clearance and you were temporarily out of the program, if you had just shut up and
well, that had to do with Tracy, not with me.
Right, but I'm just saying, if you had done as you were told and stayed quiet and not gone public, do you think they would have rehired you? Would they have called you back after a layoff?
I don't know.
We're going to go to Blair in Sedona, Arizona on the wild card line. Good morning, Blair.
Thank you, George. Hey, Mr. Lazar, speaking of gravity propulsion, George had a gentleman by the name of Channon on his October 25th show who said frequency patterns hold the planets in place, not gravity. And
frequency patterns of what?
Well, there you go. I guess you got to define exactly what he means there.
I mean, maybe it's the frequency patterns of a gravitational wave. But I mean, you have to be a frequency of some energy, and maybe that's what he was referring to, that it's not a static wave, that it's an active, and he would be right. It's if he's talking about frequency of gravitational waves, I guess that's just a correct statement.
Would you be able to speculate on a post-government disclosure society, and what specifically and how will the current suppressed technologies of unlimited power enhance American life, those leaps and bounds you were talking about?
So the effects of letting it all out.
Yeah.
Well, and how would that change our lives directly? A lot of that would depend on exactly how far they were able to take this, because if they really can't duplicate it, then it's useless to everybody. And if it just remains that the craft or components of other crafts they have are the only working pieces of that technology, and it can't be made to work with Earth technology, there's no use at all. It just is a novelty. However, if they were able to surpass that and able to duplicate some of the technology, some of the ideas, or even some of the basic concepts using Earth materials, sure, there could be it could be a world-changing event. There could be sources of energy that are limitless, but again, using alien materials requires a source for those alien materials, and I don't know of any Earth materials that could be substituted or that perform like the ones we were looking at. So I don't see where the project really would have proceeded, but I didn't know everything about it. I just knew the small amount of information that they dealt out to my group, and I'm sure I don't have anything close to a big picture. So
you'd have to think that if they had the stuff, they spent all these years trying to figure it out, and they were just stumped, that they'd just bury it somewhere. They wouldn't talk about it. They wouldn't let it out. They wouldn't want any of our adversaries to know about its potential. Because somebody else.
They'd never do that. They'd tinker with it forever. They'd never just bury it and throw it away, because just on the outside hope that a new young upstart comes in somewhere, has some neat idea, and now finally they have access to all this power and technology. They're never going to throw it on the back shelf. It's their prized possession. They're never just going to throw it in a box and do one of the Raiders of the Lost Ark thing and some giant.
Not to mention that those who brought it here were supposed to come back another time, so they would probably at least keep it and hope that happened.
Gentlemen, we're taking another break. We'll come back with our guests, Bob Lazar, Gene Huff, and John Lear. If he's still with us there, stay with us. We'll go to more of your calls after these breaks and messages on Coast to Coast AM. We are joined tonight by a couple of UFO maniacs, Bob Lazar, Gene Huff, John Lear, talking about Area 51. And in a way, it's a story that launched 1,000 businesses, posters and ashtrays and T-shirts and even Bob Lazar Christmas ornaments, books, tours, video games, bars named Area 51, bands named Area 51. There's a band named Element 115, in case Bob Lazar has never heard of that one. A lot of people have made a lot of money on the story, Bob Lazar and Gene Huff and John Lear not being among them. However, a lot of interest continues. When we come back, we'll go back to the phones, get to as many of your questions as we can here on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. We're in the home stretch with Bob Lazar, John Lear, Gene Huff, going to east of the Rockies, Glenn in Texas. Good morning, Glenn.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'd just like to say this is a wonderful experience, and what a forum Art created. I have a question for Mr. Lazar. If I may, a quick question for Mr. Lear.
Go for it.
Mr. Lazar, did the craft at S4 have any landing gear? And if so, what kind of configuration? It may help with the speculation on the specific use or general use And Mr. Lear?
Yeah.
I grew up here in Harlingen, Texas with the CAF. And is the ride in a souped-up A26 a body-numbing experience or something, even so, you just don't want to get out of? Thank you, and I'll listen on the air.
John, why don't you start first?
Okay, what was his question?
He was talking about a ride in an A26 if it was a body-numbing experience.
Oh, I don't know. I had a lot of time in the airplane, but it was not a body-numbing experience.
So you're not a big fan of that plane?
Oh, yeah, it's a great airplane. Yeah, I loved it. In 1968, I was the first guy ever to fly in the Reno air races and actually placed fifth. I had a B-51 in the B-26.
Okay.
I was 5. When John was in that race, George, we were 5.
Bob, you're part of that question.
Did the craft have any landing gear? No, not that I was aware of. Anytime I saw the craft, it was on its belly or lifted off the ground, but I didn't see any landing gear, and I did get to look in the lower portion of the craft. The only thing that's down there are the gravity emitters, the amplifiers, if you will. There's no room anywhere for any kind of landing gear, so I imagine they're always counting on the craft lifting itself off the ground or sitting on its belly, but there's nothing that stands it off the ground.
Bob, was there the I don't know what I'm trying to the bottom of the craft where when it would turn up on its side and they'd focus the gravity amplifiers on a point. Were you taught? Did you sense? Did you know? Is the bottom of that open? Does something open? Is it made of something else, or is it all the same continuous?
No, the very bottom of it's flat under the amplifiers there.
But it's
no,
solid?
It's not open. Yeah, it's solid.
Okay, but same as the rest of the skin of the craft.
I don't know. It appeared the same, but
okay.
If the material was different, I wouldn't know.
Keeping with Glenn's question, when they're in the hangars, these things, you saw 9 different craft in the hangars. Were they suspended, like ropes or cables or something?
Sitting on their belly, with the exception of the one that was tilted up that had a hole in it that I mentioned. Looks like a projectile had been fired through it.
Okay. West of the Rockies, Mark in San Diego. Good morning, Mark.
Hi. By the way, my favorite 3 guests. I'd like to ask each of them how this has affected them on a religious level, like if they were raised a Catholic, and has this had any effect on their religious beliefs, as in like afterlife or a supreme being?
Gene, why don't we start with you on that?
Absolutely. I mean, the difference between Bob and I is that he is interested in the technology and the hardware, and of course, from what I've heard him say on this show tonight, he's changing now that he's over 50. But the impetus for me and the whole thing were the basic questions of man. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going to? Life after death, God. The things that none of us are exempt from, and if these gray aliens or whomever brought these craft here had any commentary on any of that, I would like to know what they had to say. So yeah, I've given a great deal of thought to that, and Bob did not used to think about it at all. I don't know if he does now or not, but it completely changed my life. By the way, Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, also, he said that when he was on the moon looking back at the earth, it was tough to see where heaven was, and it kind of changed him philosophically also. It was a life-changing experience standing on the surface of the moon and looking back at the earth. So I guess all of us have different times in our life that make us examine our mortality and try and grasp whatever we can to get answers. But yeah, the material Bob brought forward was certainly changed my life and changed me a lot philosophically.
And Bob, do you think of it in a spiritual or philosophical way? Any differences?
No, I mean, I'm not the most spiritual person
I'm not either.
I really, if anything, I'm anti-religion. I think organized religion is probably the worst thing that's ever happened to civilization. But, sorry, that's the way I believe. It creates all the wars, and I don't even want to get into it. But you can be spiritual and, not be involved in mainstream religion. You know, is there a God? You know, who knows the answer to these questions? But, you know, did it affect me? No, because I really didn't have any religious beliefs. You know, I believe there is some order to the universe. I don't think when you die, that's it. Although, you know, science-wise, it tells me that's all that happens is life and death. But you know, you just have those other feelings inside you that have no basis or facts to follow. But I really wasn't religious before that, and after being exposed to it, it really didn't change anything or my beliefs.
Hey, John Lear, did you know, not only the Area 51 revelations, but the larger UFO picture change your philosophy of life, or change the way you look at the universe or eternity after that?
Changed everything, because now I know exactly what's going on and how it works.
Wow.
So you're going to write another? You're going to write a religious text and let us all know?
Probably not. It's there are very few that really know this, or that would understand it, or that would care.
And are you optimistic in general?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's something. First time caller, PJ, Santa Maria, California. Hi, PJ.
Hey, good morning, guys. It is a pleasure talking to all of you guys. And the question is for John Lear this morning. And John, I'm curious with lunar water findings as of the last couple of days, and I understand that having followed all three of you guys there for the last decade or so, and you know, researching on what you've talked about with structures on the moon, and obviously a lot of features that would have to be man-made or made somewhere on there. What do you think with what NASA is doing? Do you think they're slowly starting to disseminate information about things up there? Is it a new finding to them that there is water there, or do you think they knew this from a long time ago?
They probably knew there was some long time ago, because they had a lot of pictures on the on both the near side and far side. There's cities, waters, lakes, rivers, anything you want. The other day we managed to catch a spectacular picture where the holograph of Endymion, which is a crater at the top of the moon, about 1 o'clock, somehow the holograph or whatever hides it went away for just a few minutes, and a friend of mine had a telescope aimed right at it and was able to draw what is really at Endymion. It was a fascinating experience, and he came to Las Vegas, and we went over it, and we drew it many, many times until we got it exactly right.
What was there?
It was a city with buildings and towers, and it's hidden by holographic nature.
Boy, that sounds so crazy to me. I can't even relate to you.
John is back.
Yeah.
So much for the sane John. No, we're poking fun, John, but you're saying that there's all this stuff up there that's covered by holographic technology of some sort.
Oh yeah, the whole darn place is covered.
Just to keep it secret from us?
Yeah, pretty much to keep it secret from us.
We're going to go to the wild card line, Ches in New York City. Good morning, Ches.
Hi, George. It's a pleasure to speak with you, and I'm an avid follower of you and all your guests. And
thanks.
I had a couple of questions for Bob. Bob, I was wondering, I know it's been a while, but I was wondering if you could speak to any sort of description or detail as it relates to the skin of these crafts. That was my first question. My second question was, is there anything of sort of an innocuous nature, something odd or bizarre that you could remember about any sort of compartments or maybe support facilities for some of these occupants or pilots of the craft?
I didn't have any knowledge of anything along those lines as far as the occupants of the craft or anything to do with biology.
Well, he's talking about compartments inside the craft. I mean, you did get a look inside there, right? The furniture?
Compartments. inside. Yeah, maybe I misunderstood the question.
Right.
Yeah, compartments inside the craft. I did get to inspect everything in the craft with the exception of the very upper level, which I believe was just navigation and their version of electronics. But it didn't look like there was anything but open space. There were 3 seats for the occupants of the craft, but there were no individual rooms, compartments, or what have you, like we might have on one of our, any form of transportation. There's nothing like a bathroom or a smaller area. Everything is just, each level is completely open in itself, so I wouldn't call anything a compartment anywhere.
The other part of that question he asked about was the skin. Did it have skin or is it just metallic?
Well, I called it metal, and again, each part of the research done is, as it gets late, my brain begins to run out of words. But it's all very compartmentalized, and the people that dealt with the metallurgy were a completely different group of people. I had no knowledge of it. The only light I can shine on it is the one time I walked across the craft and just slid my hand along it. It was cold, and that's the only reason I said it felt like metal. It was, cooler than the ambient air. Could it have been some exotic ceramic or something? Probably so. I'm sure it wasn't just an alloy of aluminum or anything along those lines. But that's about all I know about it. It was a pewter gray in color, as was everything on the inside and outside of the craft. So that's about all I can say as far as what the material was.
Ches, thanks for the call. We're going to go to Jim in Chicago. Good morning, Jim.
Yeah, George.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I got a problem with my phone here. Anyway, I like your style because I'm also a bottom line guy. I have a question for Mr. Lazar. I want to know about the alien bodies. Has he seen them? And in his opinion, are they biological? Are they semi-biological? Or perhaps interdimensional?
I haven't personally seen an alien. I did see a photograph of a creature. Was that creature in the craft or, a pilot of the craft? I was just given some information, a brief overview of other portions of research being done. But, again, I had no direct information about any of the biological aspects of...
Well, you saw it vivisectioned and weighed.
Yeah, but like I said, I was given briefings that, well, as you know, portions of reports on many of the other areas, but I had no specific information on how that creature that I saw, or the images of the creature, if that had anything, in fact, to do with the craft. You see what I'm saying?
But you did the pictures that you did see, the vivisection or autopsy-like photos showed organs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a central organ as opposed to, and I think that's what the comments were underneath it, that from their estimation, I think I gave the description as if you had taken all our organs and allowed them all to grow together. It was one single organ in the body that they had cut in a T-shaped fashion, looking at the different chambers and whatnot in there, and I think it's this organ-looking thing was apparently performing many functions.
So it appeared to be biological to you in the photos.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. It didn't appear to be an interdimensional being, but yeah, I don't know. Can an interdimensional being appear to be biological? So that's all I can say.
Well, didn't you get a glimpse of something in a lab coat?
Yeah, oh boy, people make a big deal about that thing.
Well, and rightfully so. I mean,
no, I don't think that was an alien. No.
Just a short person with a big gray head, or
No, I didn't say anything about a big gray head.
I'm just.
Now, the other side of the coin is that they could have been playing mind games, so they had two scientists in lab coats stand next to a facsimile of a kid, a gray alien. Even though they didn't know,
a lot was going on at that time because I saw, again, this was their, backs were to me and they were playing with something or looking at something that size. Maybe they were making up a little mannequin or something to see how it would fit inside the craft, but I had no indication that that thing was alive or what was going on, so I can never say that.
But neither did they know you would be walking down the hall to go to the bathroom and look through that window.
Yeah, but I wouldn't try and read too much into that. That would be too much speculation.
Okay.
Going to try to take one more call. Got to be a quick one. Gary in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Quick question.
Well, more of a statement.
Okay.
In 1966, I was the youngest person working for an electronics company who delivered projects to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is now NASA. And normally I was kept out of the loop as to what they did, but this one particular time I walked through a door that I wasn't supposed to, and there on the easel, by an illustrator who was incredible by the name of Glenn Hawk, was the Space Shuttle, 1966. It did not fly till 1981. So this suppression of information has been going on for eons.
Well, point well taken, and I think Bob and John and Gene are sort of examples of what our knowledge is of suppression of this kind of technology. Any closing comments from our guests, Bob? Anything you want the listeners to know about what's next for you or what this strange journey has been like?
Well, the strange journey has really been something. Certainly has taken my life in directions I never thought it would. I do constantly get people that are, really wanting to ask me questions, even people doing research and looking for, actually even in a couple instances, some research labs that are looking at advanced propulsion and just looking for some possible insight. And I apologize for not getting back to everybody, but if you do want to contact me, just be patient. And the only place is our website. It's the email
UnitedNuclear.com.
Well,
right.
Sales at UnitedNuclear.com, or just go to our website
right.
and buy some stuff.
All right. Bob Lazar, Gene Huff, John Lear, thanks for staying up late with us. It was fascinating. Next Sunday, JFK Roundtable. Hope you can join us then. I'm George Knapp. Good night, everyone.